And welcome back to Chicago Bulls Insider. Today, we're talking about Jonathan Kuminga and if the Chicago Bulls should be interested in acquiring Jonathan Kuminga this offseason. And so before we go ahead and jump into it, I first want to remind you to slam dunk on that subscribe button, just like Modest Buzelis slam dunks in games. And so in exchange for slamming on that subscribe button, I'm going to give you nothing but daily content around the Chicago Bulls. So make sure you hit that subscribe, you hit that like button, and you join the Chicago Bulls Insider family as we talk nothing but Chicago Bulls basketball. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the topic for today. We're talking about the Chicago Bulls. Are they interested in Jonathan Kuminga? Should they trade for Jonathan Kuminga? And what would a possible deal look like for Jonathan Kuminga? And so let's go ahead and start with the first part, which is, are the Chicago Bulls interested in Jonathan Kuminga? And so this comes from an article that is on ClutchPoints. And this is written by Brett Siegel, who is an NBA insider and a reporter. And so he does talk about how the Golden State Warriors are certainly interested in keeping Jonathan Kuminga. But he also has a section within this article that talks about teams that would be interested in Jonathan Kuminga. And so he talks about the Chicago Bulls, he talks about the Miami Heat, and he talks about the Brooklyn Nets. And so within this article, once again, that you can find on ClutchPoints, this is what he had to say there about the Chicago Bulls and their interests. As he says, another team that league sources indicated as one keeping a close eye on Kuminga over last year is the Chicago Bulls. And so once again, you can find this article on ClutchPoints, and this is Brett Siegel who wrote this. And so with that being said, look, should the Chicago Bulls be interested in Jonathan Kuminga? And look, I think, yes, I think that the Chicago Bulls should absolutely be interested in Jonathan Kuminga. And I also feel like, should the Chicago Bulls trade for him? I absolutely think the Chicago Bulls should look to acquire Jonathan Kuminga if he is available. So let's start with why they should go out and get him. And let's first look at the numbers. And so when you look at the numbers, I think that you see a player that has certainly figured something out in this league. And I think that if you're banking on potential, I think that Jonathan Kuminga is certainly a player that I'm banking on can get to his upside, especially after what we're seeing here with Patrick Williams. Look, if it's Jonathan Kuminga that's coming through the door for the Chicago Bulls, sign me up for that. And so let's look at the numbers. And so you can see a player that has obviously figured out a way to be a double-figure scorer in this league. He went from 9.3 points all the way up to 16.1 a year ago. Even in a down season this year, which we're going to talk about, he's at 15.3 points a game. So that's still some good production. You see the assist at 2.2 assists, the blocks and the steals would be a bit concerning. We'll talk about that. He's at 0.4 for the blocks, 0.8 in the steals. And then the free throw percentage, that's something that he definitely has to get better at, shooting 66.8% from the free throw line this year. So that has definitely got to get better. And his three-point shooting, he's at 30.5% this season. Career-wise, he's at 33.2% from the three-point line. So that certainly has to get better, especially coming over to the Chicago Bulls and the offense that they like to run. Next, you see his field goal percentage is at 45.4% from the field, which is not bad, but you can see that that has taken a dip since he has been in the league. And so that's something that you definitely want to address as well. And lastly, with the games played, you see 47 games played, 10 started. This is, the least amount of games that he's played in his career. And so that is something that also would be concerning. And so let's talk about the fit for the Chicago Bulls and why I think that they should go out and trade for him. And so first off, I think with Jonathan Kuminga, you're getting a player that he fits your timeline. And so, he's a young player that allows you to skip over, the step of going into a full rebuild, which is what AK has already stated that he wants to do. He wants to go with young established players that have some upside. And Jonathan Kuminga certainly checks that box. And so, coming over and kind of fitting the build for the Chicago Bulls, allowing them to build, with a youth movement, and then you can still build around him. That is definitely a reason why I would go ahead and trade for Jonathan Kuminga. He's going to be 23 next season. Next up, as far as his fit in the offense, I could see him really running the floor and maximizing that part of the offense, because remember, the Chicago Bulls definitely switched up their offense It is now a much faster offense. They want to get more possessions. They want to shoot the ball a lot more from downtown, but they also want to get out and run in the fast break. And so Jonathan Kuminga with Coby White, with Josh Giddey, with Modest Buzelis, I think that would literally put a ton of pressure on defenses. I could see they might have to put up extra rims in the United Center because these guys are going to be dunking at just a high clip for the Chicago Bulls this upcoming season if the Chicago Bulls go out and get Kuminga. Next, look, I think another thing to really like about Jonathan Kuminga coming over is his championship experience. Remember, he won the championship with the Golden State Warriors in 2022 as a rookie, and one of the things that the Chicago Bulls need to do is they need to get their identity established. And so I think that Josh Giddey, Coby White, they definitely helped us get there. But I think that Jonathan Kuminga, Modest Buzelis can take it to another level because with Modest Buzelis, we know how he competes. We know how he goes after it. I think that Jonathan Kuminga is a player that's going to bring in that championship experience. And also, too, his experience just as a player, what he's gone through because he's been in and out of the rotation. He's had months where he's been really good. He's had months where he's not been so good. And I think that that's something that absolutely would rub off on the Chicago Bulls. And I think it helps the younger players coming in. So I think that that is another reason why he certainly would fit the Chicago Bulls. And lastly, look, I think that this would be huge and a great fit for the Chicago Bulls from the value standpoint. I think that you are getting a player much like Josh Giddey last season when he came in. You're getting a player that has fallen out of the rotation with the Golden State Warriors. I think he just needs a change in scenery. And I think that you put him into a position here with the Chicago Bulls to really take off. So I like that with the value standpoint. And I just feel like the long-term potential is something that the Chicago Bulls should absolutely take a chance on, because if they were willing to stick with Patrick Williams for this long, you certainly have to take a chance on a young NBA champion that has a ton of upside in Jonathan Kuminga. And so those are the fits. Now, as far as just the things that would be concerning as far as going out and getting Jonathan Kuminga, one, you have to worry about the injuries. We just talked about the fact that he played 47 games. And I think that that is something as a Chicago Bulls fan, and just seeing just the injuries and the players that this team has had to deal with, that would be a little scary for me trading for a player like that. Now, I do think it's something that he can overcome. Next up is going to be the consistency. And so we just mentioned briefly here Patrick Williams, which we're going to talk about a little bit more here shortly. But consistency is something where it's like the Chicago Bulls cannot afford to trade for just a project that never gets to it. And so I think that Jonathan Kuminga has shown enough to me that, look, he's definitely still, coming out of the project phase as far as the building is concerned. But I think he's definitely closer to getting to his upside versus, getting down to his floor. So I'm comfortable in taking a chance with him if I'm in the front office, like I said, versus, if we had the situation with Patrick Williams, where that was certainly, a project taking him out of the draft at the fourth pick, and he just never really got to that. I mean, he still could get to his upside, but Jonathan Kuminga, he's a player that's shown me that, okay, I'll take the chance on that, but it's something the Bulls would have to consider. Next, I think another thing that the Bulls have to wonder about is going to be his defense. And so we did talk about the block shots. We talked about the steals. That's something that's going to have to get better, because defensively, this team, it needs a defender. Okay. And so Jonathan Kuminga doesn't have to necessarily come in and be just the on-ball defensive guru for the Chicago Bulls, but he definitely has to be good enough to make the rotations. He's got to be willing to help out there, and he's also got to be willing to rebound a lot better than what he's shown in his career. Like that's something that's got to get better. You cannot be at the 4.6 rebounds, especially if you get into a starting position with the Chicago Bulls. And lastly, as far as his playing style, we talked about his athleticism. I definitely think it fits with the Bulls, but here's another thing to think about. He's a guy that likes to have the ball in his hands. Bringing him over with Coby White, with Josh Giddey, and then also too with Modest Buzelis, who I do expect to take another step. I think Billy Donovan draws up more plays for him him and then gets him into different spots where he can utilize his ball handling ability, then you're thinking that Jonathan Kuminga, or if you're getting Jonathan Kuminga, he's not just going to come over and dominate the basketball. And so can he still be effective? Can he still get to his ceiling, not hit his floor, and not have the ball in his hands as much? And so those are the things to think about. I'm all in and going after Jonathan Kuminga. And so next, here's how you could get Jonathan Kuminga. And so there's only 3 possible scenarios because he is a restricted free agent, going to bring his contract up here in a second. But right now he's playing on the last year of his contract, and then he enters into restricted free agency, which means this: the Golden State Warriors can, one, go ahead and match whatever a team throws out there and bring him back. So that's the first case scenario, which, again, going back to that article, it sounds like they definitely want to keep Jonathan Kuminga. It's just going to come down to the numbers and how they approach that. Number 2, what they could do is they could just outright let Jonathan Kuminga go. And so that means that a team goes in, they offer the money, and then the Golden State Warriors do not want to match that, and they let him go. And then lastly, the third scenario, which I think is really possible for the Chicago Bulls, and I think is more likely if this happens, would be a sign and trade, meaning this: the Golden State Warriors come to the conclusion that, look, they do not want to lose Jonathan Kuminga for nothing. They understand that he wants to go to the Chicago Bulls, and they're going to pay him like he wants. And so to not lose him for anything, the Golden State Warriors would maybe want some pieces back, not maybe, would get some pieces back, some players, and maybe a pick or something like that, depending. But then we would get Jonathan Kuminga. They would get the players that they want. Everybody's happy. He gets the contract and so on and so on. And so I think that that's probably going to be more likely, is that it would be a sign and trade. And I say that because there have been players that have been linked to the Golden State Warriors, like Vooch, who I think still would definitely fit the timeline for what the Golden State Warriors want to do with Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler, and then also to Draymond Green. I think that the Golden State Warriors still have a lot of young pieces, and maybe they would consider moving on from Jonathan Kuminga if they're not wanting to go ahead and pay him the money like that, and they want to go ahead and maximize this championship window. Remember, Vooch is on an expiring contract for $21 million, and he has been linked to the Golden State Warriors, which is a team that certainly could use his size. Now, he's not going to help you out defensively, but he's definitely going to check the box for the Golden State Warriors as far as getting a double-double nightly. So the rebounds are huge. You see that if you've been watching playoff basketball against the Rockets. That's one of the things that the Rockets have an advantage with the Golden State Warriors, is the rebounding. And so Vooch certainly helps you there, and he can stretch the floor and knock down some three-point shots, which has always been a staple for the Golden State Warriors. Next, another player that could be likely on the move in a sign and trade would have to be Patrick Williams. I think that Patrick Williams has been linked to the Golden State Warriors. Just going back, just thinking about, I think it was a Bleacher Report article that suggested that maybe the Golden State Warriors would be interested in Patrick Williams. They feel like that, they could maybe turn that project into something special here in the NBA, because he just hasn't gotten to that potential yet. And so, if they want to take a chance with him, that he can defend. You also know that Patrick Williams does want to shoot the three-point shot, which, again, that is what the Golden State Warriors want to do. They want to shoot the three. And so he definitely fits that. And so he would get all the threes he wants, but defensively, if they feel like that he gives them an added punch, or he gives them something that maybe Jonathan Kuminga doesn't, then that's another situation where I could see it maybe being a sign and trade. And when you're talking about the money and how that would look, now, one of the things that's suggested again in that article is that he's looking for $30 million. All right. And so we don't know what Jonathan Kuminga is looking for. He hasn't outright said it. Nobody knows, but that's just the speculation that maybe it's going to take $30 million to get Jonathan Kuminga to go ahead and ink a deal. But look, if 25 to 30 million for that deal for Jonathan Kuminga, I think is not bad for the Chicago Bulls. And I think that they definitely have the money to do so, even with him, Coby White, Josh Giddey, all in an extension. I think if you sign all those players, the Bulls still would have some money to take care of some business later on. And so the money is not the issue. I think it's more so the fit for the Chicago Bulls. And I just think that this would be a great scenario for the Bulls, because you get a young player that I think has a ton of upside that I think the Bulls could definitely get it out of him. And I think that the situation fits well for him. And also for the Bulls, you get rid of some players that I think you're probably you've come to the conclusion that you have to do that, because with Vooch, you're talking about the youth movement. It's fully in effect, I think, with the Chicago Bulls, and that would definitely continue it on when you move on from Vooch. And then also, too, with Patrick Williams, look, it just has not worked out with the Chicago Bulls just yet. I don't know if it is, and I'd much rather have a guy in Jonathan Kuminga who's a lot more closer to figuring it out than him. And so for those reasons, I'm saying that the Chicago Bulls would absolutely go ahead and trade for Jonathan Kuminga. And so let me know in the comments what you guys think. Do you think that AK should consider going out and getting Jonathan Kuminga? Do you feel like the Chicago Bulls will offer Jonathan Kuminga an offer sheet and make it interesting? Do you feel like a sign and trade that gets rid of Patrick Williams and Vooch would be something that you would like to explore? Let me know in the comments what you guys are thinking. And as we always say, go Bulls, and I will see you guys on the next one. All right, peace.